Anyway, then is GMS. If you are a beginner and you want to learn how to do stuff, I'm not gonna lie. I think GMS is probably the best one to go for. GMS is nice and easy to use, and I wouldn't say it's so especially overwhelming. And I would say that it is very effective, and as well as that, it has a lot of good presets. I made loads of presets, honestly, for GMS, like loads. These are all mine. I'm just gonna warn you, a lot of these aren't good because these are all really old, but they're all presets I made. So how does this thing actually work? Well, when you first open it, it will be open on this. So just go on here, go on user, and find default. Now, because these are all things I've made, you don't have to worry about trying to find it. It should be the only thing there, but for me it's over here. So now you have a saw wave. So this is where the sound starts. You have these three things that it has as an input. Right now we're only getting the first one. If we want to get the second one as well, let's make this a square. If we want to get the second one as well, we turn this knob. So just a minute, without it, and then with it. You can also have the same for the third one, which, I don't know, sine. So there you go. Then, if you're, what you can also do is you can modulate your sound. There's one sync modulation, which I did not know what this was supposed to be for the longest time, and I finally figured it out. So I was confused at first, because if you turn this up to 100%, this is literally just a saw wave, 2 octaves up. It'll just play, so I'm playing C sharp 5 right now. This is literally just a saw wave playing this note C sharp 7. If I turn it halfway, C sharp 6. However, this does not sound like a pitch filter. So what this should be when I move it up and down is a pitch filter, if that's what it's doing. However, if I set this to have a range of an octave and start moving the pitch, you can hear that's different. It's not the same. So what's actually going on here is that this is something very similar to changing the pitch, but a little bit different. It will basically, in the same space that your sound wave already takes up, it will make it so that the sound wave that you already have finishes early as you turn it up, and then repeats itself. But then when it gets to where it would stop if you hadn't affected the sound, sorry if I've gone a bit quiet, I've been in a bit of an uncomfortable position while I've been recording it, I've just moved. So I shouldn't have said that while I was in the middle of explaining this. So yeah, it will still remember the position that your sound should stop and repeat itself if you hadn't changed the pitch of it with the one sync modulation. And instead of just letting it keep going as normal, when it hits that point where it should have reset, but you kind of did it early, it will reset again. So this is a bit weird. I actually think I should open up Paint for this because it's something that's better explained visually. This probably sounds a bit complicated that I'm saying it verbally. It's actually really simple, this. What this means is, just let it come up. Come on. I've clicked it already. Can you just stop loading that? I just want to open a new project. I don't care about what all this is. Right, here we go. So, 2D shapes. Open already. Right, okay. So, say we have a saw wave. And it looks like this. Right? Now, if we want to make that 1.5 times that pitch, if we made it double the pitch, but doing it by changing pitch or changing the one sync modulation would always look the same. If we made it triple, again, always the same. If we made it multiplied the pitch of this by any whole number, it would sound the same doing it by one sync or by pitch. When you have a number that isn't whole that you want to change, multiply this like original sounds pitch by, it will sound different using pitch and by using one sync modulation. If we want to make this exactly 1.5 times higher pitch, obviously there's 2 here, so we make it so that in the same space of time there are 3, which, you know, makes sense. So we would do it like this if it was changing by pitch and not one sync modulation. Again, sorry, I kind of slow drawing these. As you can see, there's a delay once I've already clicked the button. Just waiting for it to load the screen. So it would look like, again, not perfect because I'm just doing this off the cuff, but there. It would look like that, and one going up. So as you can see, there is now 3 in the same space of time where there was 2 before. But if we were doing it by one sync modulation, it would instead look like this. It would start out the same as doing it by pitch. But then, when it gets here, can you select the line? When it gets here, it will get halfway across here, and then I'll realise, hang on a minute, this is where I stopped last time on the thing that I started as, so let me restart. And it will now go back up again, like that. And it's, as you can see, it's not the same as doing it by pitch. But that's what kind of stumped me for a while, because obviously this would only ever happen if you wanted to multiply the pitch of something by something that isn't a whole number. Otherwise, this effect never really happens, because of course, if I just said double this, then by the time that this thing got here, it will have done 2 perfectly. So it wouldn't have had to stop halfway through and change the shape. So yeah. As you can see now, this wave has a completely different shape from before, even though by trying to making it 1.5 times the pitch, which now makes it have a completely different timbre and sound like a completely different sound. So yeah, that is what is going on here with the one sync modulation. So yeah, this is 4 times the pitch, halfway is 2 times, and obviously the rest of these is in between. Somewhere along here will be 3 times. I wonder if that's exactly 2/3 or not. I think it is. So yeah. That's how that works. There's also FM modulation. It says 2 to 1. What this basically means is it will use 1 as the source sound and 2 as the FM modulator. Let's try sine wave. As you can hear, that's quite powerful. And there's RM modulation. Less aggressive, but also makes it sound quite interesting. So I mentioned RM modulation before, and how it's similar to AM modulation, but I'd get back to it. I will explain how it works, but I also want you to not worry too much if you don't understand why this works. It's to do with something called phase cancellation, which I highly recommend that you learn about, but I'm not going to talk about it in this video because it's already something that I re-explain almost every video, and yeah, I think it's something that I don't want to waste time on right now. But basically, what RM modulation does is, I actually explained a concept that I haven't really gotten to yet. So we've talked about subtractive synthesizers, where you have a sound that's already kind of in there, and then they're called subtractive because the way you make different sounds is you take things away from the sound you started with to get interesting different sounds, with stuff like filters and all that, or you just alter it. So yeah, and GMS is another subtractive synthesizer. 3 times oscillators are a starting example. Yeah, they all already have a sine wave and stuff like that and saw waves in it. Um, there's also granular synthesis, which I talked about, but the other kind of main type of synthesis is additive synthesis. Additive synthesis uses nothing but sine waves, so the only thing that really is there to start in additive synthesis is sine waves. However, that doesn't mean that additive synthesis is limited. You can actually make any sound ever, at all, out of sine waves. To do, and it's to do, again, it's to do with phase cancellation, how that's even possible. So again, you should learn what that is. But if you have enough sine waves with enough kind of precision of different volumes and all that, and different ratios of frequencies, you can create any sound wave ever. In fact, if you have a sine wave and then another sine wave that's double the pitch of the original one, then triple, then quadruple, and so on, and you keep adding like 5 times the pitch, 6 times the pitch, in a certain ratio of the volume going down with each one, you get a saw wave made out of sine waves. So yeah, that's how additive synthesis works. So what you do when you aura modulate something is you take the original sound and you break it down into the sine waves that make it up, and then take the frequency of each of those sine waves, and then you do the same for the modulator. And then what it will play out, like when it plays back the sound, when you get the result, what it will give you, what it will output, will be, for each pair of sine waves, it will be the sum of and the difference between them both. So for a much simpler example, if you had a 500 Hz sine wave and an 800 Hz sine wave, then the result would be you would get a 1300 Hz sine wave, which is of course 500 plus 800 Hz, and you would get a 300 Hz sine wave, which is 800 take 500. So yeah, it will give you both of them the frequencies added together, as well as the bigger one's frequency taken away from the littler one's frequency. So there, that's how that works. But generally, again, because of phase cancellation magic, it sounds relatively similar to AM modulation, only more kind of smooth and pleasant. So yeah, don't worry about it too much. So yeah, from there you kind of get to this section, which I'm not gonna lie, I kind of don't get the point of this phase option. Let me just set this oscillator 2 back to normal. Let me set this oscillator 2 to be the only one we can hear. So from what I understand, this phase option makes it change where it starts playing the sine wave. So obviously, usually the sine wave starts from the exact middle of the oscilloscope, and then it moves up, and then it moves down. But if I set this to 50%, it will move down first, then up. If I set it to 25%, it will start from the very top, move down, and then up, and then move to the middle and all that. You get the point. The thing is, it doesn't really change the sound that much. I imagine this is just for when you have, I don't know, let's have a saw wave and a sine wave. Sorry, 2 sine waves. They sound exactly the same because they're both the same, but we now have 2 sine waves right now. But now if I change the phase of this one... Oh, it doesn't even... Huh? I think that is changing it, but it's just too subtle to know it. Yeah, I don't really get the point of this, I'm not going to lie. So yeah, then there's... Turn the saw back to a saw wave. Then over here there's unison, which is something I'm very surprised we haven't talked about yet, because it's something that a lot of synthesizers have, but I just realised this is something we haven't mentioned yet. Unison is where you take multiple copies of the sound you've made, all with small differences. So right now there's only one voice, so there's no copies. But we can go up to 16 on GMS, which is more than usual. Most of them cap it at 9. And this sounds different because all of them have a different pitch by a small amount. If I turn this to 0, it sounds basically exactly the same. It is different. Slightly. But not much. But of course, as I make them all have different pitches, if I turn it up to 100%, it's... Yeah. 100%, I think, it depends from synth to synth, but on GMS I think 100% means that at most one of the copies could be as far as an entire note too high-pitched or low-pitched to be the same pitch as the original. I would recommend not going much further than 50% unless you really want to have like a full-on kind of super detuned electro kind of synth. But it makes your sound a lot more full, and it makes it so that it doesn't sound the same all the time as you hold the note, because they all have different ways where they interact with each other, all the different copies, and it makes it so that as long as you hold the note, the sound keeps changing slightly. This over here can change how wide the stereo images for the unison, so that basically means that all these different copies can be further on the left or right ears. And you can get some interesting effects similar to what I was showing earlier when you have a sound and then another sound with a very small pitch difference. If you then set this unison phase retriggering on, which is another thing that unison does, is typically it will also have it so that all the different copies don't start playing at the exact same time. And by default, this happens on GMS. However, if you turn on this unison phase retriggering, they all start at the same time, which makes it sound like this. Or actually, it's not going to notice the difference until I turn the detune on. If I turn this off, you still kind of get this like swooshing effect, but it's not as pronounced as when I turn this on. And another thing you'll notice is when you have unison phase retriggering on, especially with a lot of unison, let me just turn it to 16. Even though I haven't told this sound to start loud and get quieter over time, doing that has automatically made it so that when I first press the note, it's louder than other times. That's because all the different waves of all the different copies are in synchronization at first. They're all moving up at the same time and they're all moving down at the same time. They slowly move out of sync as the pitches start to, fall apart because they're all slightly different pitched. Some will go slower than the rest of them, some will go faster than the rest of them, until eventually they're starting to move down when some are going up and all that. And that makes the overall sound less loud, but also sound more interesting and kind of, again, swooshy. So yeah. And that's what this does. And this lets you choose where in the phase they start. So when this is at 100 or when this is at 0, it will start where it normally is. 50% halfway, you get the idea. Pardon me. I kind of overlooked this here earlier, but you can also have white noise in a GMS by turning this knob. And yeah. Now if you go into this side, you do get some stuff here, but I'm not going to lie, most of this I just wouldn't touch. Yeah. It's mostly stuff that you can do in other synths anyway, or with other effects. And, it's simpler just to leave it. Anyway, there's a filter section over here where you can apply a low pass, band pass, or high pass filter. I'll go over this. So that's a low pass. As you can tell, when you move this cutoff point, it will drastically reduce the volume of all the things above that point. What it'll do is, for each octave higher than that frequency the sound gets, it will reduce it by a certain amount of decibels. How many depends on the sound itself. It ranges typically from 6 decibels to 24. 24 is very high though. I think most of them 12. Most of them will reduce the volume of the sound by 12 decibels for every octave higher it gets in the cutoff point. The resonance will make it so that the rest of the sound is quieter, but the sound is louder around the frequency of the cutoff point. And if I turn it to really high settings, there's also this thing over here, keyboard tracking, which you can't really demonstrate very well easily, but essentially what it makes it is that so what point this cutoff point corresponds to on the frequency spectrum depends on what note you're playing. So this makes it much better so that you have a kind of melody that plays some very high notes, but you want to low pass it, but then the high notes, almost all of them get cut off because it doesn't take into account how high those notes already are when you apply the low pass. And it sounds like it's doing nothing on the low notes, but then it sounds like it's doing way too much on the high notes. You can apply keyboard tracking, and then it'll do the same amount to the have the same amount of effect on the sound for each note, no matter what it is. This type button just toggles between the different types. You can click on the lights to just go whichever one you want to though, so I would do that instead. Band passes are like low passes, except instead of it being everything above the cutoff point, it will be everything around the cutoff point. And high passes, as you can probably guess, is it gets rid of everything below the cutoff point. So yeah. Over here we have an envelope. This basically is a thing where you can have this kind of attack, decay, sustain, release thing I already talked about, but instead of having it control the volume of the sound, you can have it control something else. For example, the filter. If I apply a filter, and it's really low pitch like this, there we go, I can then turn up the amount all the way here, and then I can reduce this decay. As you can tell, when I first press the note, it removes the filter, but then it fades back in. And if I can have it also give it some attack, so that it has to take some time for it to fade to removing the filter. It sounds quite nice. You can do a similar thing with modulation, where I can have it so that the saw will be RM modulated by a sine wave. I'm just going to make it so if the sine wave was at 0, it would still have an effect, but it wouldn't be very easy to hear. So I'm going to mess with the pitch a bit, so it's a bit easier to hear the effect of this. So yeah, so you can hear that. This invert thing will do just what you think it does. It will invert the effect. So if I turn this so that it's always got the RM on, what I can do is I can set this to be inverted, and now it will remove the RM. Like that. There's then frequency, which is just what you'd think. And you can also invert that. Yeah, kind of messed that up there. And then finally there's LFO. LFO will, well, control the effectiveness of the LFO, which we haven't gotten to yet. The LFO does the exact same thing as the envelope, except instead of doing it once and then never doing it again, it will continuously do it over and over and over and over. So you can set how often it'll do it. So I'm going to set it to a quarter of a beat, and I'm going to make it affect the frequency. Yeah, it's going to sound like that. In fact, I think level is volume. So yeah, that's a better one. The amount obviously controls the amount of it. Oh yeah, and these switches, it's just that you can have two different envelopes. That's what all this is. So you can control the shape of the LFO. By default, it's a sine wave, so that is kind of how it affects the volume. That is the shape by which it affects the volume. If I set it to a saw wave, it will pluck it continuously. And if I set it to a square, it will be at full or be at nothing, and it'll just switch between those two. Anyway, I'm going to have it on the saw wave. I actually might make it a bit slower. I'm not sure what LFO retriggering is, I must admit. So yeah, what this LFO thing can do is I can have it so that the LFO is not always as effective. Just a moment. Oh, this is still on frequency. LFO mode. Just a moment. So yeah, right, if I remove this, I'm actually confused now. I don't know, just a minute. Let's try filter. I usually use this with filter. Right, okay. So, you can hear that having an effect. Yeah, there we go. Oh, so I guess the amount doesn't matter for the LFO mode. Okay, the amount doesn't matter for the LFO mode. Basically, this fades in the LFO's effect. So I can have the attack to fade it in and the decay to fade it out. And then if I turn it off... That's not what I wanted. But yeah, you get the point. That's what it does. By the way, if yours isn't working, the reason why is if it's in LFO mode, then envelope 1 will affect LFO 1, and envelope 2 will affect LFO 2. You can't have envelope 1 affect LFO 1, sorry, LFO 2, or envelope 2 affect LFO 1. It has to be, you know, if I switch this to the second envelope and tried to do the same thing, it wouldn't work, because it would try and apply it to the second LFO, which isn't doing anything. So yeah, this is just volume. This is just... Oh yeah, I kind of missed this section because it's pretty useless. You can just move things up 2 octaves or down 2 octaves. This is the ADSR, so fade in, the fade out, where it stays at if you hold the note, and how long it takes to fade out after you let go of the note. So yeah, not much to say there. This is another way you can increase volume. By the way, you can make things pretty loud like this, so just be careful with it. I would not recommend using this much unless you have a really quiet sound, because this is actually a very serious volume booster thing. I'm actually quite surprised. Most of these FL synths are too quiet, if anything, but this one lets you really crank it up. There's panning, there's pitching. Frequency sliding, I would not recommend using this necessarily, but not because it's bad, just because there's a better inbuilt way you can do it. I'll show you in a second. What this basically does is... You can probably hear it. Every time I press a note, the frequency takes a little bit just to slide to that note, and as you turn this up, it takes longer. The reason why I won't use this is because personally I prefer to use this over here. When you select port, I think it works in both porter and mono mode, but I just pick porter because that's the mode I've always picked. It does the exact same thing. And every synth will have this section. And the slide time here is in actual beats. So you can actually control it so that when it's at 12, it'll take half a beat. When it's at 6, it'll take a quarter of a beat. When it's at obviously 1, it will take a full beat. 12 is often a good setting. Oh wait. Sometimes you might turn it to 18 if you want a bit of a longer one. I wouldn't really do much further than 1 most of the time unless you're purposely doing a super bendy effect that's not very on pitch. Because obviously then it starts to sound like... But yeah. So yeah, is that everything about GMS? I accidentally closed it. Let me reopen it, please. Why can I not reopen it? There we go. Oh yeah, I kind of skipped this whole section. This whole section is just effects. This is distortion, this is bit crushing, this is flanging, this is phasing, this is a low pass filter, which we have one here, but okay. This is a high pass filter, which we have one here, but okay. This is echo, this is reverb, this is pan, this is trance, which isn't necessarily an effect, but basically it controls the volume. Just maybe this would be better if we started over with a saw wave on its own. So you can hear every half beat, and you can change how much the volume goes down here, and how long it takes to get to full volume. It sounds very pleasant, but at the end of the day it is just volume automation, and you would usually do this kind of thing with sidechain anyway. But early on I used this a lot just to make synths sound a bit more interesting, so yeah. The only thing here that might be useful to you is bit crushing, because FL Studio does not have an inbuilt bit, like a native bit crusher. I think Destructor got a bit crusher in it. I have not really messed with it. I don't know if it's very good or not. But yeah, if you need a bit crush in FL Studio without getting another synth that's outside of FL Studio, this is one of your only options. And sadly it's inbuilt into here, but it's a pretty good bit crusher at least. I personally don't like the filter, so you can turn it off like that, but you can then change the bits. Or the sample rate, really. So yeah. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention. All these effects, as you click and hold on them, you'll hear them. Oh wait, does it even work like that? Apparently it doesn't even work like that. I thought that's how it worked. Oh. Well anyway, you will not hear them. They will not be applied to the sound until you click this glue thing. and when you unclick it, obviously it'll remove it. So yeah, that is GMS.